Hey guys, it's Mike here, and today I'm going to be reviewing Justice League, the newest entry in the DC Extended Universe in a film long awaited by fans of these characters. As after nearly 60 years, the iconic team of superheroes were finally brought together for their feature film live-action debut. And with such a monumental film, there was bound to be a lot of hype and high expectations for this film, especially in the wake of Wonder Woman's success. So, did this movie live up to the hype? Is Justice League good? Well, in this video, I'm gonna break that down. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and enable notifications so you could see all of my content right away when it comes out. So I've been a big fan of DC Comics and these characters for pretty much all my life, and the Justice League are certainly a big part of this. As a kid, I used to watch Super Friends, which was a wacky, campy version of the Justice League made by Hanna-Barbera. And of course, I watched the live-action films such as Superman and the Tim Burton Batman movies. But it was really while watching the DC animated universe created by Bruce Timm that my love for these characters and these stories really took hold. The way they built up Batman and Superman in their own respective series, as well as their iconic villains, and then had crossovers between the two before finally building to the Justice League series, which was excellent. These shows were also largely responsible for me getting into comics and discovering the further stories I've come to love. So I definitely came into this film, as well as the rest of the DC Extended Universe, as a fan of the franchise and someone who wanted to see these characters come to life, accompanied by a story befitting them. However, thus far the DCEU hasn't totally lived up to those expectations. Now, I wasn't really a fan of the DC's New 52 reboot, or the choice to push everything in a grimmer, more dark direction, as well as the choice to change numerous iconic costumes and backstories, or how Superman's portrayal changed. DC's comics really were a mess for a while, and it seemed like the DCEU decided to model much of its world on the reboot. Furthermore, the man whose vision WB and DC decided to go with isn't the best choice for that role in Zack Snyder. Now, I actually love the Watchmen movie, which I feel was a good adaptation save for things here and there, and it was far better than the V for Vendetta movie, which gutted the story and the point of the graphic novel. However, my relationship with Snyder's movies is more miss than hit. I like the Dawn of the Dead remake, but I never really cared for 300, and when it came time for his version of Superman, I wasn't exactly thrilled. As for Man of Steel, I actually like it overall. It has some good action sequences, interesting visuals, and isn't a bad film, but it does have its flaws. The biggest for me being that Superman's character isn't as well represented as he should have been. His backstory seemed far more morally ambiguous, and he's just told how important he is over and over and what he has to do when he should be figuring this out on his own. The film feels confused as a result, as does the point of who Superman is really supposed to be and what he really stands for. The next entry is Batman v Superman, which was also directed by Zack Snyder, and again this film feels confused and the entire concept was rushed. It really felt like DC wanted to catch up to Marvel with the crossovers, and a number of characters are really shoved into the story as a result, with the worst offender being Lex Luthor, whose doomsday plan seems like it's out of another movie. And the death of Superman's storyline was really done far too soon, with the audience nowhere near as invested as they should have been in the character. Again, I like this film overall, even more so on the Ultimate Cut, but it was a step down in many ways from Man of Steel, and it wasn't a good sign for the vitality of the DCEU. And then Suicide Squad came along, which, while polarizing and downright hated by many fans, I enjoyed and had a lot of fun seeing in theaters. While many blasted the studio interference and most of Jared Leto's scenes being cut out of the film, I still felt that it was a step in the right direction for the company. But the next film, Wonder Woman, is the one that really caught this brand in mid-freefall, as not only was it a smash financial success, but it was a great comic book movie, giving Wonder Woman an awesome backstory, making her fit into the real world, and then really showing off why she's a great character. This is the first film that really got one of these iconic characters right for once, and became the first real sign of hope for the future of this franchise. And that of course leads into the the newest entry, which brings together the League to face the bigger threats which can bring them together and possibly destroy their world. And this is perhaps the most important film in the still young DCEU, just as the Avengers was for the MCU. But did this film also fumble the ball, which was just picked up? Overall, I'm happy to say that this film continued the upward trend of quality for the DCEU because I really liked it. The film is really a lot of fun and far more so than I was expecting. I went into it with lowered expectations, having just rewatched Batman v Superman the night before and Man of Steel before that. Looking at the trailers, it was clear that the tone of the film would not be that of other Zack Snyder films, and it was going to be a lot more fun. So that's what I went into the movie expecting, and that's exactly what I got. Now, the plot of this film revolves around the invasion of the villain Steppenwolf, whom is an ancient being of immense power searching for items on Earth known as mother boxes. But naturally, he isn't being friendly about this quest and has brought armies of his parademons with him. If this plot succeeds, the world as Batman knows it will be destroyed. Thus, he must recruit other superpowered metahumans in order to form the Justice League so that they can stand against this invasion. Now, this plot is of course inspired by a number of storylines from the comics, more specifically Justice League Origin from the New 52, which, while not my favorite Justice League story, isn't too bad of a way to start it off. However, there are some key changes and inspirations from other comics that I actually prefer. The biggest one being that Steppenwolf is the main villain of this film and was the one teased in Batman v Superman, as opposed to Darkseid. As I always thought, starting out with Darkseid or having him encounter the League so early on wasn't the best idea when it comes to cinematic escalation, but this was the direction that DC was going in, so starting out with someone below him who is a servant of Darkseid is better than just throwing him into the first movie. Of course, Superman died at the end of Batman v Superman, so Batman takes on the larger recruiting and leadership role, and this role works for him as a character, as much of his arc in this film is accepting help from others and working together to take on a greater enemy. And I think Ben Affleck is really great as Batman. He's good at playing Bruce Wayne and Batman, and he's good at being serious and comedic when the scene calls for it. The more I see of him in the role, the more I think he fits perfectly. I'm hoping to see him reprise his role in the upcoming Matt Reeves Batman trilogy, and to see him in the role for as long as he's willing to be. Wonder Woman is also in this role in a leadership position of her own, and once again Gal Gadot is great as Diana Prince. At first, I wasn't too sure about her casting in BVS, but as time has gone on, she's gotten better and better in this role and is fitting of the character. Just like in Wonder Woman, her action scenes are great, and we get even more lore exploration for her in the Amazonians. Learning how her people were connected to Steppenwolf and the Mother Boxes was really cool, and it almost felt like Lord of the Rings at times. Which may seem odd for a movie like this, but DC seems to be going all out with their fantasy elements, which is great since the days seem to be long gone of beating around the bush and minimizing the fantastical elements of comics. But Wonder Woman is badass and pretty great here. Now I'll get into some of the new additions to the cast. Making his real debut in this film is the Flash, played by Ezra Miller. He was briefly in a cameo in BVS, as were the others, but he becomes a real character in this film, and he really serves as the comedic relief. Flash can be a very funny character as shown in the Justice League cartoon, and they take advantage of that here. Just the way that Barry Allen interacts with the world around him, and especially the people, is funny due to his awkward yet inquisitive nature. And his super speed allows the filmmakers to pull off some cool sequences using slow motion. I'm not sure any of them are as impressive as Quicksilver's from the last two X-Men movies, but I would say he definitely puts the Avengers Quicksilver to shame. I still don't know how Marvel messed that up so bad. Time will only tell if Ezra Miller's Flash will be as good as Grant Gustin's, but he's off to a good start. Another surprise for me was Jason Momoa's Aquaman. I was never a huge fan of Aquaman, although he was cool from time to time, but DC clearly wanted him to get over with audiences in this iteration. I wasn't sure how Momoa would be able to pull this off, as his other roles have really been hit or miss, but he was another standout character here. Pretty much every member of the League was given time to flesh out some of their backstories and characteristics, and he was no different. We actually get to see Atlantis, and Aquaman interacting with Mera and fighting underwater, and we also got to see more of his powers at play. Aquaman just isn't some guy who can talk to fish, he's a badass Atlantean warrior with super strength and control over water. And when he's not beating up enemies, he's also cracking some jokes. And it's really a breath of fresh air, no pun intended, for the character. The other new member joining was Cyborg, whom I've had issues with since the New 52. I've always liked Cyborg as a character, however I've preferred his Teen Titans counterpart to the newer version. And I don't care for him being a founding member of the League instead of someone like Martian Manhunter or Green Lantern, but he fits into the story the film is crafting, as Cyborg's origin is now tied directly to the mother boxes, and his ability to integrate with them is essential here. Also, I'll get more into this later, but I didn't care for the CG suit. Ray Fisher does fine with what he's given here, and we even do get to hear him say his now iconic line during the film, so that was pretty cool. But I feel that the League are handled well enough in this film, and the scenes that they interact with are some of the best of the movie. It's difficult to say exactly which scenes come from Zack Snyder's version of the film and which were directed by Joss Whedon, but I could definitely feel Whedon's influence all throughout the film. Certainly the film retains much of Snyder's visuals and ideas, but overall it feels far less like one of his films than the others. This is largely due to the comedy and fun factor of this movie, which is welcomed here. There's a lot of humor throughout the entire film, but not in a way that cancels out the more serious scenes and moments. Nonetheless, it would be interesting to see Zack Snyder's cut at some point in the future, just to see exactly what the differences are. As for Steppenwolf as a villain, he's alright. He's not exactly the most memorable or interesting villain out there, and his plan isn't the most unique, but he serves as a powerful foil that the Justice League has to unite against. His role mostly exists as setup to greater things, such as what Loki did in the Avengers. He isn't the big bad of DC, but rather someone who will introduce the concept of the fourth world, new gods, and powerful foes that our hero will have to face in the future. And it also helps to establish just how important Superman was to the Earth's survival, and how Superman's death in BVS led to the events of Justice League. He may not be memorable, and the DC villains can only get better from here, but he does his job well enough. As for other aspects, the direction and cinematography here is fine, although that's a complex situation. The score, however, is excellent, and once again, Danny Elfman returns to DC to compose the music, and it sounds great. His excellent Batman score was one of the factors that helped make the Burton Batman and the animated series so great, and hearing flourishes of it in the live-action adaptation was so awesome. I don't dislike Hans Zimmer's music, but it's a nice change of pace to have someone else do the music in this film. And as for my cons, this film does feel a little rushed and underexplained at points. Perhaps more could have been said about where Steppenwolf came from, more about the mother boxes, and a number of other points. But this could also be due to the film serving as setup for what's to come. It may not have been as intrusive as it was in BVS, but it's definitely a factor here. Although again, the CG can be excessive in this film, and it isn't always the best looking CG either, but there's so much of it that it's bound to happen. Maybe I've started to become desensitized to CG because so many of the movies I see now are just filled with it, and it feels expected now, but I'd still like more practical effects in the future, especially with Cyborg's body because it's just not working out for him here. You can use CG to touch up things and improve practical effects, just don't do mostly CGI characters like Cyborg or fully CGI characters like Steppenwolf. I'd much rather see guys in tangible costumes. Also, this is most likely due to all the behind the scenes changes made to this film, but some of the sequences in this film and things that happen clash. I can definitely tell with some of these scenes which ones are Snyder's, but many are edited in a way that feels like there's more to their scenes, or whatever payoff they'd receive were cut from the film. It's not exactly surprising that a Snyder film would have a longer cut, it, and it will likely be put out on home release. However, as we saw with BVS, many times these cuts aren't good for flow and leave out important plot elements, so we'll have to wait and see about the home release. Now, there's some things I'll have to discuss in the spoilers section after my rating, but overall I really like this film. I went into it cautiously, hoping it would at least be fun, and I had a blast. Is it the best constructed, written, or developed movie? No, but it's another step in the right direction for DC and helps to continue the positive momentum for the company. However, the future will very much decide the importance of this film, as well as how the DC Extended Universe performs. But for now, they seem to have gotten things back on track, so let's see where it goes from here. I'm going to give Justice League an 8 out of 10. Of course, this rating could change as I rewatched the film in the future, but I had a lot of fun with it and it exceeded my expectations. Now, as I said before, I'm going to get into spoilers, and it's really hard to not discuss them with this movie. Now, one of the things I also really liked about this film is how much importance it places on Superman. As I've said before, I don't think the movies have really done him justice thus far, and in many ways they have really downplayed how important of a character he is. So this movie putting more emphasis on him, what hope he brought to the world, and how the world needs Superman was a change I've been hoping for. Although I was almost expecting Superman to turn bad in this film when he somehow comes back from the dead, they do tease this a little bit when he comes back, and we get an awesome scene where he shows off his strength against the other members of the League, including an awesome moment where he's able to follow Flash's movements and starts moving at super speeds too. As for how he comes back from the dead, it was a little convoluted. They needed to use a mother box in the Kryptonian ship where Doomsday was created, and then Flash has to transfer energy into it, but it served its purpose nonetheless. I wish we also got to see some of Black Suit Superman in this, but I'm not too sure that'll ever happen now. Superman also being the biggest threat to the New Gods and Steppenwolf on Earth makes sense with his species and powers, and Superman being able to beat down Steppenwolf was a cool sight. Although Steppenwolf mentions Darkseid and the New Gods, so it's clear that he's only there to put those pieces into place for the audience. How they will do Darkseid is another question, but hopefully the DCEU will have a handle on everything by then. I no longer feel that a massive reboot event like Flashpoint is a necessity, although I'm not sure how some fans will feel. There's also 2 end credit sequences for this movie which are pretty cool, and both of them are great. The first one shows Flash and Superman as they prepare for a race. Now, this is one of the most iconic recurring events between these two characters, as they have a rivalry about who's faster. We've seen it in the comics, the cartoons, and now in live action as they bolt off into the distance toward the Pacific Ocean. We don't really get to see a conclusion, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's followed up on in future movies. The next scene is another big setup sequence. We see in Arkham Asylum as a guard is calling out for Lex Luthor. However, when he enters Luthor's cell, we find out another inmate has taken his place. We then see Deathstroke, the Batman and Teen Titans villain, as he boards a yacht owned by Lex Luthor. Luthor then tells him about the Justice League, Superman's return, and that he thinks they should put together a league of their own. This seems like a clear setup for the Injustice League, which could possibly be the villains of Justice League 2. And if that's the case, I'd definitely be interested in seeing it. The formation of the DC villains fighting against the Justice League is one of those storylines that would be great in live action, so I really hope that they can pull this off. But overall, guys, this has been my review of Justice League. If you're a comic book movie fan or a fan of DC, I'd recommend it. It's not the best comic book movie ever made by any stretch, but does its job to establish the League, bring back Superman, and push the DCEU into a positive direction. So it's worth watching in my book. Let me know your thoughts down below, and if you like this video, subscribe to this channel and enable notifications to see all of my content right away when it comes out. And as I always say, stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yes, and you'd better subscribe and enable those notifications.